to talk to you about why homophobia and transphobia are economic issues. I will start with research that I conducted in a seemingly very different place, but that on closer inspection is actually not that very different. The post-Soviet Republic of Armenia, which for 70 years was part of the larger planned economy of the USSR. In 1991, when the USSR dissolved, Armenia became an independent nation-state. This came at a very bad time, as the country was at war with neighboring Azerbaijan over the region of Nagorno-Karabakh. As a result of the war, the World Bank and other Western capitalist agencies advised Armenia to privatize very quickly. By 1998, a majority of Armenian industry, that is about 60% of the shares of about 713 companies that had been privatized, went into the hands of only 2.5% of the population. This small minority became what is today popularly called the oligarchy. This oligarchy did two things. First, their wealth allowed them to capture state power, and thus they became the state. Second, after having bought almost entirely the entirety of the country's industry, they began to liquidate it, which means they sold off pieces of factories piece by piece, literally dismantling machinery, glass from windows, the metal frames of structures, doors, and so on. Armenia, a highly industrialized republic, became deindustrialized in just a matter of years. These structural economic transformations had massive repercussions for people in Armenia. When the places in which most Armenians worked were broken down and sold off piece by piece, it meant they no longer had a place to work. Beyond losing their employment, the oligarchy's power was also having other effects. Monopolies on goods meant extremely high prices for critical needs like sugar, butter, oil, electricity, and so on. There were cuts in many critical services, such as pensions for the elderly, social services for the disabled or the poor, and the end of the Soviet Union's planned economy that guaranteed food, housing, and medical care. For the first time in their modern history, Armenians witnessed homelessness. So as you can probably imagine, there was a lot of discontent in the country. In 1999, there was an attack on the parliament building, which killed the prime minister and the parliament speaker, and a hostage crisis in a police station when an armed group demanded the release of political prisoners, killing 5 people in 2016. There have also been mass social and political movements. Most recently in 2018, Armenians widely participated in a mass social movement that finally was able to oust the prime minister and his oligarchy party from power. However, another war, continued private development, increases in the cost of living as a result of an influx of Russian immigrants due to US sanctions on Russia that have raised housing costs in the country, have meant ongoing political economic crisis rather than reprieve. On top of this, because of the war with Azerbaijan and the latter's ethnic cleansing campaign in Nagorno-Karabakh, there has been an influx of 100,000 refugees from this region into Armenia. This has deepened the housing crisis in a context where at least 9% are still unemployed. And many more, although unofficially, are underemployed. In the midst of all of this political and especially economic crises, in 2012, 2 major events, what we might call moral or sex panics, occurred, which gripped public and media attention. A firebombing of a gay bar and an attack on a march for diversity that focused not on terrorism, and this is public media focused not on terrorism of hate crimes, but rather what it meant that there was a gay bar and a gay bar and gay people in Armenia. State officials supported the firebombers, as well as those who attacked the march. Media focused on the very existence of gay people in the country, and a very common narrative of sexual perversion prevailed. Homosexuality would mean Armenians would no longer get married, have children, or they would form perverse families. From then on, one could find these narratives of sexual perversion regularly on television, in print news, and in social media in the country. Homosexuality was regularly seen as a threat. Furthermore, the concept of gender, that man and woman are social roles that are not necessarily tied to biological sex, became represented as extremely destructive. as it was said to lead to the complete ruins of the traditional family on which the country depends for the next generation. As these narratives were widespread within Armenian media, I conducted 150 interviews with families across the capital city, and I found that every single person mentioned something that around which they were very anxious, but it was not homosexuality. Rather, it was problems having to do with social reproduction, or the ways in which each generation makes use of resources to reproduce itself. Social reproduction is very much about the labor it takes to reproduce, but it is also about necessary resources. That this requires food, housing, income, and social security. Armenians felt that they did not have these, and thus fertility rates were at an all-time low. While media talked increasingly and incessantly about sexual perversion, Armenian families were deeply concerned about their ability to socially reproduce their family and their nation. This probably sounds like a familiar script. In the US, we have recently seen a rise not only in transphobic and homophobic sentiment, we have also seen this accompanied by legislation that seeks to block trans Americans from receiving basic health care, legal recognition, and the right to even exist publicly. With a major housing crisis, unemployment, extreme costs of childcare, and a rise in general feelings of economic insecurity in many parts of the United States, all made possible by privatization, and many services and the cutting of public services, there is also serious concern in the US regarding social reproduction. This is all accompanied by a felt decline in morality. Americans, in other words, seem to feel that capitalism has been preventing life as they would want it, whether they would phrase it this way or not. Unfortunately, many would rather phrase it as trans people leading America to ruin. In any case, we are talking about economic issues. Thank you.